The ballroom of the Global Leadership Forum glittered with chandeliers and ego. Cameras flashed. Diplomats whispered. And at the center of it all stood Donald Trump, chin raised, shoulders stiff, radiating the confidence of a man who believed the world still revolved around him. Across from him stood Ibrahim Traoré, calm, steady, unmoved. He didn't wear a suit worth thousands. He didn't arrive with an entourage or a circus of advisors. He looked like a soldier who'd slept 5 hours and needed only truth to sharpen his spine. Trump smirked the moment their eyes met. "Africa is weak," he declared loudly, projecting his voice so the cameras could catch every syllable. "Weak nations beg. Strong nations lead. And Africa," he jabbed a finger toward Traoré, "still crawls behind us." Laughter flickered through the room, nervous, unsure, desperate to be on the right side of power. A few Western officials nodded, as if the statement were a fact etched into history, not a relic of fading arrogance. Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't even shift his weight. Instead, he let the silence drag out just long enough to make Trump uncomfortable. The kind of silence that strips a man's confidence layer by layer until the truth exposes him like an X-ray. Then Traoré stepped forward. One step, only one. But it felt like the room tilted around him. "And yet," Traoré said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the golden air, "you fear us the most." The laughter died instantly. Trump's smirk faltered, just a twitch, but enough for the cameras. Enough for the world to freeze, rewind, analyze. His eyes tightened, searching for a comeback, but nothing arrived. Not even the ghost of confidence he carried moments earlier. Traoré continued, "Weak nations don't make superpowers panic. Weak nations don't force presidents to shout insults. Weak nations don't get blamed for your failures. Fear isn't born from weakness. Fear is born from truth." Every diplomat's head turned, not toward Trump, but toward Traoré. The shift was subtle, but real. Like a tide turning. "Tell me, Mr. Trump," Traoré pressed, "if Africa is so weak, then why do your generals study us? Why do your corporations chase our minerals? Why does your government interfere in our elections? Why does your media obsess over our rise?" Trump opened his mouth. But nothing came out. Traoré leaned in just enough for only Trump to hear the final blow. "Fear makes men loud. And today, you're screaming." The room erupted, not with applause, but with stunned silence. The kind that tells you something historic just happened. Trump's words didn't just echo through the room, they cracked it open. A murmur rippled across the hall, a mix of disbelief and discomfort. Some leaned back in their seats, others glanced at each other as if silently asking, did he really just say that? But Traoré didn't flinch. He stood exactly as he was, steady, upright, unshaken, while Trump tried to loom over him with the old weight of American dominance. Trump smirked, doubling down. "Africa is weak," he repeated, louder this time, as if volume could turn his insult into reality. Cameras shifted, microphones angled forward, and reporters leaned in, sensing something was about to break. Traoré's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with the cold clarity of a man who's heard empires talk like this for centuries. He stepped forward, closing the distance Trump had tried to create with his words. The room tensed. Even the Secret Service agents straightened. Then Traoré spoke, his voice low but resonant, carrying the force of a whole continent behind it. "Weak," he said. "If Africa is weak, why does the strongest nation in the world tremble at the rise of its people?" Trump's jaw tightened. The audience froze. Traoré didn't stop. "You call us weak," he continued, "but your fear exposes your truth. Powerful men don't fear the powerless. Empires don't collapse because of weakness. They collapse because of the strength they underestimated." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy, electric, ready to explode. "Maybe," Traoré added, "it's time you look in the mirror and ask why Africa, the weak one, is the threat you can't ignore." A single clap broke out in the back of the room. Then another. Then the entire hall erupted, not politely, not cautiously, but with the raw energy of people witnessing a historic shift. Traoré didn't smile. He didn't need to. He had already taken control of the room. Trump's smirk widened as he leaned across the glossy conference table, tapping his finger like a judge delivering a sentence. Cameras caught every angle. He wanted the whole world to see his performance. Africa is weak, he repeated, louder this time, savoring the echo in the room. And weak nations fall in line. That's how the world works. The American officials behind him nodded, some with hesitation, some with arrogance. They expected Traoré to lower his gaze, to shrink, to soften his voice. But he didn't move, not an inch. He simply inhaled slowly, grounding himself like a mountain before a storm. Traoré lifted his head, meeting Trump's stare with a stillness so sharp it cut through the noise. The room shifted. Even the journalists sensed it, a kind of pressure, a warning, a presence. If Africa were truly weak, Traoré said quietly, you wouldn't lose sleep over us. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried more force than Trump's shouting ever could. Trump blinked, taken aback for a split second. Traoré continued, if we were weak, you wouldn't try so hard to control our gold, our oil, our people, our future. Weak nations don't get sanctioned. Weak nations don't get invaded. Weak nations don't get lectures. He leaned forward. Power threatens power. And Africa threatens you, that's the truth you choke on. A ripple went through the hall. Even the camera operators froze, unsure whether to zoom in or run. Trump's jaw clenched, but the confidence in his eyes flickered. He opened his mouth to retort, but Traoré wasn't finished. You call us weak to hide your fear, Traoré said. But fear shows itself. It shows in your voice. In your hands. In the way you look at me, hoping I won't expose what you already know. He sat back, letting the silence hit harder than any insult. Tell me, Mr. Trump, he said, if Africa is so weak. Why do you fear us the most? The room erupted, not with applause, but with shock. No one had ever spoken to a U.S. president like that. No one had dared dismantle his bravado with such surgical precision. And Trump knew it. His face flushed, his fingers trembling just enough for the cameras to catch. Africa weak? No, not today. Not in this room. Not in front of Traoré. Trump's smirk widened as journalists circled around him, waiting for the next soundbite. He loved this moment. The cameras, the microphones, the hungry American audience. See, he boasted, waving a dismissive hand toward Traoré. Weak nations talk big. Strong nations don't need to talk at all. But Traoré didn't blink. He stepped forward, calm like a soldier who'd walked through fire many times and learned to fear nothing. Then why, he said slowly, his voice slicing through the hallway, are you doing all the talking? The room froze. Trump's smile twitched, just enough for the cameras to catch it. A small, involuntary flinch, the kind a man makes before he realizes he's been cut. Traoré continued, voice steady, almost surgical. You call Africa weak, but you hide behind armies. You call Africa small, but you build walls. You say you fear no one, yet somehow, you always fear us. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Reporters leaned forward. Security looked uneasy. Trump's posture stiffened, his chin tilting upward like a man trying to reclaim height he suddenly felt he'd lost. You don't fear Africa's weakness, Traoré said. You fear Africa's awakening. Trump scoffed again, forcing confidence back into his voice. You think you can scare me? You think anyone's scared of your little speeches? Traoré stepped closer, close enough that Trump's bodyguard subtly shifted, unsure whether to intervene. I don't give speeches, Traoré replied softly. I give warnings. Another silence, heavier this time, thick enough to smother every camera flash. And here's mine, Traoré said. Stop treating Africa like a battlefield you own. Because the next time you point fingers at us, the world will see whose hands are actually shaking. Trump opened his mouth to fire back, but nothing came out. His breath caught just long enough for everyone, including himself, to realize Traoré was right. He was trembling. And the cameras were recording it. Truth isn't weak, Traoré added. Colonial fear is. He turned and walked away. Unbothered, unhurried, unshaken. Trump stayed frozen, swallowing his anger like a man choking on his own pride. The journalists didn't follow Traoré immediately. They stayed with Trump. Because for the first time that day, he looked like the weaker man. Trump's jaw tightened as the murmurs in the hall rose. Traoré hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even leaned forward, yet somehow he held the entire room in the palm of his hand. Trump felt it. Everyone felt it. And that only made him angrier. He slammed his hand on the table, trying to reclaim the authority slipping away from him. You think a few loud speeches make you strong? He barked, his voice cracking at the edges. You think Africa scares us? You're nothing but a... But Traoré lifted a single finger. Just one. And the room fell silent. You keep saying weak, Traoré said, his tone calm but razor-sharp. But every time Africa stands up, your voice shakes. Every time we say no, your hands tremble. Every time we choose our own path, you panic. He leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on Trump. So ask yourself, Mr. Trump, who is actually afraid of who? Trump opened his mouth but nothing came out. Cameras captured every twitch in his face, every hint of frustration. It wasn't just a political clash anymore, it was a psychological unraveling in real time. Traoré continued, strength isn't about shouting. Real strength is standing alone when entire empires want you silent. He tapped the table gently. Africa isn't weak. Africa is rising. And deep down, you know it. The hall erupted, not in applause, but in stunned whispers. Trump felt the air shift against him, the authority slipping out of his grasp like sand. His advisors shot uneasy glances at one another, suddenly aware that the confrontation they encouraged had backfired spectacularly. Traoré folded his arms, unbothered, composed, unshaken. You fear Africa because you can't control Africa, he concluded. And that is your real weakness. Trump looked away, not because he chose to, but because he couldn't hold Traoré's gaze any longer. And everyone saw it. Trump's grin hardened as Traoré stepped closer, the room shrinking under the weight of a silence that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. Reporters leaned forward, cameras hummed, and even Secret Service shifted uneasily, because Traoré didn't walk like a man intimidated. He walked like a man preparing to bury someone's arrogance. Tell me, Mr. Trump, Traoré said, his tone calm but sharp enough to cut stone. If Africa is weak, why does America tremble every time we stand up? Trump scoffed again, but it didn't land the same. His voice wavered, not enough for his supporters to notice, but enough for Traoré to catch. The Burkinabe soldier smiled, the kind of smile only a man who has buried empires can wear. A smile that says, I've seen your type before, and I survived all of them. You think strength is about armies? Traoré continued, pacing slowly, deliberately. You think it's about jets, missiles, and money? No. Strength is when a nation has nothing, but refuses to bow. Strength is when a people survive every invasion, every betrayal, every sanction, and still rise. Someone in the back whispered, he's not afraid of him at all. And it was true. Traoré stood inches from Trump, staring him down like a lion evaluating prey. Do you know what America fears? Traoré asked. Trump swallowed. What? Africa united. The room froze. For a moment, even the lights seemed to dim. Trump blinked rapidly, thrown off balance, his usual bravado cracking. Traoré's voice carried across the hall like a verdict. You fear our unity. You fear our resources. You fear our youth. You fear our future. And you fear me, he tapped his chest, because I am proof that Africa no longer bows. Trump opened his mouth to respond, but Traoré didn't give him the chance. You call Africa weak, Traoré said, but the only weakness I see is the fear in your eyes. A murmur erupted. Cameras flashed. Trump stepped back instinctively, and the world saw it. A former U.S. president retreating from a soldier he tried to belittle. Next time you mock Africa, Traoré said, turning away, make sure your voice isn't shaking. The room exploded. The room was shifting, slowly, almost imperceptibly, away from Trump and toward Traoré. Even the officials who had clapped for Trump at the beginning were no longer applauding. Their hands were folded, their mouths tight, their eyes trapped between fear and fascination, waiting to see how far Traoré would go. Traoré didn't rush. He let the silence weigh on the room like a hammer about to drop. Then he took a single step forward, the kind that didn't just close distance, it claimed territory. Do you want to know why Africa isn't weak? He asked, voice sharp enough to cut through Trump's forced smile. Because we survived everything you called strength. Colonization. Exploitation. Theft. Starvation. Propaganda. And yet, he pressed his hand to his chest. We are still here. Trump opened his mouth, but Traoré raised a hand. Not yet. You had your turn. Now listen like a man. The crowd murmured, some shocked, some thrilled, all fully awake. Cameras zoomed. Phones lifted. Traoré continued, voice rising with a power that didn't need permission. You call Africa weak, he said, but your greatest fear is an Africa that stands united. That's why you destabilize nations. That's why you spread lies. That's why you fund wars. Because you know one truth you will never admit. He pointed directly at Trump. Your power depends on Africa being silent. Trump slammed his hand on the table. That's a lie, he barked, but it sounded more like a crack in his armor than defiance. His voice trembled. His jaw tightened. His eyes darted, searching desperately for support in a room that was no longer offering any. Traoré stepped even closer. Then why, he asked calmly, are you shaking now? Gasps echoed through the hall. Cameras surged closer. Trump swallowed hard, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he looked small, not physically, but historically. He looked like a man who realized the world had shifted without him noticing. Traoré turned slightly, addressing the entire room. Africa does not fear America. Africa fears only one thing, losing itself. And that, he looked back at Trump, is something you will never control again. The room erupted, not with applause, but with a stunned silence that carried more power than any cheer. Something irreversible had just happened, and everyone knew it. Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't even shift his weight. Instead, he leaned back slightly, as if Trump's rage had become nothing more than background noise. The room fell into a strange stillness, an electric, coiled silence that made even the cameras hesitate. Trump, expecting panic or apology, found only a man staring at him with the calm of a seasoned warrior who had survived far worse than political theater. Tell me something, Donald, Traoré said, voice low, steady, unshakable. If Africa is so weak, why did your voice crack the moment I walked in? Trump stiffened, just enough for everyone to catch it. Staff members exchanged quick, nervous glances. A single microphone picked up someone gulping. Traoré continued, stepping forward so the light hit his face like a verdict. Weak men measure strength with noise. Real strength doesn't shout, it changes the room. And look around. He motioned with a slow sweep of his hand. This room changed the moment you saw me. Not because Africa is weak, but because you know a strong Africa ends your power. The words dropped like a hammer. Trump tried to speak, but Traoré cut in again, clean, precise. You fear Africa because you can't control it anymore. You fear Africans because we don't bow. And you fear me, he paused, letting the moment stretch. Because I speak what your own people are whispering about you. Trump's face reddened, frustration boiling beneath his skin. He jabbed a finger toward Traoré again, but this time it trembled, not with anger, but with something closer to unease. Traoré noticed. Everyone noticed. You asked why you fear us? Traoré said, stepping close enough that Trump had to lean back. Because Africa is rising. And you? You're shaking. The room erupted, not in applause, not in shouting, but in stunned, breathless silence. A silence that declared exactly who had won that moment. The room shifted again as the confrontation neared a breaking point. Trump leaned forward, gripping the edge of the podium as if the weight of his own anger was pulling him down. Cameras zoomed in, catching every twitch in his jaw, every faltering breath. The world watched a man who claimed to fear no one, suddenly facing the one leader he could not intimidate. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm was louder than Trump's shouting. Your problem, Traoré said, stepping closer, is that you believe volume equals power. But power is the ability to stand still while another man shakes. Trump opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. His advisors exchanged frantic glances. They had seen this look before, the moment Trump realized he was not the strongest man in the room. Traoré continued, you call Africa weak because you hope it's true. You mock us because you fear what happens the day you cannot. He pointed toward the map behind Trump, a digital world projection glowing in the dim light. Look at the nations you call weak. Those are the same nations that refuse to kneel. The same nations rising together. The same nations you cannot control. A murmur rippled through the hall. Even Trump felt it, that shift in the energy that happens when truth slices through propaganda like a sword. He slammed his hand on the podium again, but this time it didn't echo with force. It echoed with desperation. You think fear gives you power, Traoré said, turning slightly so the cameras captured his full silhouette, composed, unbothered, unshaken. But fear is a ruler who always betrays the one who serves it. Trump swallowed. Hard. Traoré delivered the final blow without raising a finger. If Africa is so weak, he said, why do you tremble every time we speak? Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Trump's face darkened, and for the first time, even his own supporters hesitated. They weren't watching a political debate, they were watching a man be dismantled by nothing more than truth and presence. And the world felt the shift. Africa was no longer the silence in the room. Africa was the voice shaking the walls. The hall had fallen into a silence so complete that even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Trump expected Traoré to back off, to soften his tone, to retreat the way so many leaders had done before when confronted by American pressure. But Traoré didn't move, not an inch. He stood there as if the entire world were watching from behind his shoulders. And maybe it was. Trump jabbed a finger toward him. Africa is weak, and you know it. That's why you hide behind speeches. Traoré didn't blink. If Africa were weak, he said, you wouldn't tremble every time we rise. The room tightened. People exchanged glances. Trump's jaw shifted, a flash of uncertainty passing through his expression. Traoré stepped forward, not aggressively, but with the calmness of someone who had already decided the outcome. You fear Africa, he said softly, because you can no longer control it. You fear leaders who don't bow. You fear nations that refuse to sell themselves. You fear the truth you've spent decades covering with bombs, sanctions, and propaganda. Trump opened his mouth to respond, but Traoré cut him off, clean, sharp, final. You call us weak so your pride can breathe. But deep down, you know the truth, the world you built is collapsing under the weight of your own arrogance. And Africa? We survived everything you threw at us. We're still here. Stronger than ever. The camera zoomed in. Traoré's eyes steady, Trump's face tightening with the realization that he had lost the moment. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound cracked. Traoré didn't give him room to recover. You fear Africa, Traoré repeated, because this time, it's not Africa standing in your shadow. It's you standing in ours. Gasps rose across the hall, some shocked, some thrilled, some terrified of what this shift meant. Trump's confidence evaporated, his posture shrinking as Traoré turned away, leaving him frozen in place. For the first time that night, Trump realized he wasn't dealing with a politician. He was facing a force he couldn't intimidate. A continent he couldn't belittle. A man he couldn't break. Now, Traoré said without looking back, let the world decide who's weak.